The wind howled over the open plains, kicking up dust around the wooden fence posts that lined the ranch. Mary stood just outside the barn, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, her cheeks red from the cold. She had walked 10 miles that morning from the little room she rented behind the church. Her boots were worn, and her pride, what little she had left, was buried under months of hunger and humiliation. The man before her, Daniel Harper, was taller than she expected. A quiet cowboy, known for running one of the biggest ranches in the county. Folks said he'd lost his wife 3 winters ago, and since then, he'd turned colder than the land itself. He looked at her now with eyes that saw everything but revealed nothing. "I heard you're needing help," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to betray her nerves. "I can clean, cook, or tend the animals. I don't expect much pay, just a place to sleep and some food." Daniel studied her. Her dress was plain, her hands rough and cracked. A widow, yes, but not fragile. There was something steady in her gaze, something that refused to break even after all life had taken. "You can work," he said finally, crossing his arms. "But this isn't an easy place. My men start before dawn. They don't take kindly to strangers." She nodded quickly. "I'll stay out of their way." He tilted his hat, still looking at her. "What happened to your husband?" Her lips pressed together. "He died last winter. Fever. Left me with debts I couldn't pay." Daniel's jaw flexed. "And no family." She shook her head. "They stopped calling when I stopped being worth marrying." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the creak of the barn door in the wind. Then she said it, quietly, almost as if to herself. "No one marries a fat widow, sir, but I can work." Something in her tone, bare honesty, not self-pity, made him look up sharply. Her words carried the weight of truth, one that didn't beg for mercy. She wasn't trying to please him. She was simply laying herself bare. Daniel took a slow step forward, the dust crunching under his boots. "You think that's what I see when I look at you?" She dropped her gaze. "That's what everyone sees." He was silent for a long moment. Then, his voice dropped low, the kind that carried more weight than any comfort could. "Then they don't see right." Her head lifted slightly, eyes widening just a little. He continued, his tone steady but softer now. "You came here when others wouldn't. You're standing in the cold asking for work instead of pity. That's strength. And if there's one thing this ranch runs on, it's strong people." Her throat tightened. She tried to speak, but the words caught. She just nodded, blinking fast. He turned toward the barn. "Come on then. There's feed to haul and floors to scrub. We'll talk about pay after supper." From that day, Mary worked like she had something to prove. She mended torn saddles, cooked hearty meals, and kept the men's quarters cleaner than they'd ever been. The ranch hands grumbled at first, having a woman around, especially one who didn't speak much, but over time, their respect grew. She was up before sunrise and the last one to turn in. Daniel watched her quietly, often from a distance. He saw how she carried her burdens without complaint, how she smiled at the horses but rarely at people. Every once in a while, he'd catch her humming softly while she worked, low and broken melodies that spoke of a life that had seen too much loss. One evening, after a long day of rain and mud, he found her sitting on the porch steps, her dress damp, her hair clinging to her face. She looked exhausted. He handed her a cup of coffee, and for a long while, they sat in silence, listening to the rain drum against the roof. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked finally. She gave a small smile. "Leave where? The world's not exactly waiting for me." He looked out over the dark fields. "Maybe not. But this ranch, it could use someone like you." Her brows furrowed. "Someone like me." He nodded. "Someone who knows how to keep going when life doesn't give them a reason to." Her lips parted, but she couldn't find the words. The way he said it, quiet, sincere, made something warm stir deep inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. As the weeks turned into months, Mary became the silent heartbeat of the ranch. The men started bringing her small things, fresh apples from town, scraps of fabric, books. Daniel began spending more time near her, fixing fences together, sharing meals, even smiling once in a while. Then one afternoon, when the sun hung low and golden, Mary was hanging laundry behind the house when Daniel approached. His hat was in his hands, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You remember what you said the first day you came here?" he asked. She looked up, her cheeks flushing. I said a lot that day, Mr. Harper. He smiled faintly. You said, no one marries a fat widow. Her eyes dropped to the ground. I remember. He took a slow step closer. Well, you were wrong. She froze, her breath catching. He continued, his voice deep and steady. Because I would. She looked up then, eyes wide, searching his face for mockery. There was none, only truth, the kind that settled deep into the soul. Why? She whispered. He smiled gently. Because I've seen what beauty looks like when it works hard, forgives often, and stays kind even when life isn't. And that kind doesn't fade. Her silence was heavy, trembling. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness but from something she hadn't known in years, being seen. Truly seen. For the first time in a long time, Mary smiled fully, the kind of smile that could melt winter itself. And Daniel knew, in that quiet golden hour, that she had already mended more than just his ranch. She had mended something in him that he didn't know was broken. The days that followed changed in small, almost unnoticeable ways. The ranch still woke to the same call of the rooster, the same lowing of cattle across the fields, and the same whistle of the wind through the broken fence posts, but somehow, everything felt different. The air seemed softer, lighter. Mary still rose before dawn, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders and stepping into the kitchen to start the fire. The men would come in with mud on their boots and cold on their faces, and she'd greet them the same way, quietly, with coffee ready and biscuits warming in the oven. But now, Daniel lingered in the doorway longer than before. He'd wait for her to glance up from the stove, and their eyes would meet for just a moment, just long enough to say everything neither dared to speak aloud. The men noticed too. One morning, while they were saddling their horses, one of the ranch hands, Joe, nudged another and said under his breath, "Boss looks happier these days. Wonder if the widow's got something to do with that." The other man chuckled. Wouldn't blame him. Woman's tougher than all of us, and she can make stew like nobody else. Daniel overheard them but didn't say a word. He just gave a faint smile as he tightened the reins and rode out into the morning mist. That evening, he returned late. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the lanterns inside the house cast a golden glow through the windows. Mary was sitting by the hearth, mending a torn saddle blanket. Her hair had slipped loose from its pins, curling softly around her face. "You should rest," Daniel said, his voice quiet as he stepped inside. She looked up, smiling faintly. "If I stop, I'll just start thinking. Better to keep my hands busy." He moved closer, the warmth of the fire lighting one side of his face. "You think too much, Mary." She gave a small laugh. "A widow learns too. Thinking's all that keeps her company most nights." He took a slow breath and sat in the chair opposite her. For a while, they just listened to the fire crackle. "You know," he said finally, his voice thoughtful, "when I lost Clara, I thought the ranch would die with her. Every part of it reminded me of her. I couldn't walk into this house without hearing her laugh. So, I stopped listening altogether. I worked until I couldn't feel. Thought that was the only way to survive." Mary set the needle down gently. "And now," he looked at her, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "Now I realize I was just waiting for someone to bring the sound back." Her breath hitched, and for a moment she couldn't speak. She wanted to look away, but his gaze held her like gravity. He reached out, hesitating only for a heartbeat before brushing his fingers lightly against hers. Her skin was warm, calloused, and trembling. Neither spoke after that. The silence said enough. Dash dash dash. The next morning brought rain, steady, cold, and unrelenting. The men grumbled as they worked, mud clinging to their boots, but Mary never complained. She went from one end of the barn to the other, checking feed, drying blankets, and keeping the fire burning. Daniel watched her from the far stall, leaning against a post. Her dress clung to her legs from the dampness, her hair darkened by the rain, and still she kept moving. He finally said, "You'll catch your death working like that." She looked up from the bucket she was scrubbing. "And if I do, at least I'll have earned my keep." He shook his head, stepping closer. "You think you have to earn your right to stay here." Her lips pressed together. "I think I've learned not to expect kindness without reason." That hit him harder than he expected. He reached for the rag in her hand and took it gently from her fingers. "You don't owe me work to deserve a place here. You've given this ranch more life than it's seen in years. That's not something I could ever pay back." Her eyes filled with something like confusion, something close to fear. She didn't know how to accept that kind of gratitude. You don't have to say things you don't mean, Mr. Harper, she whispered. He took her hand, holding it firm this time. Then stop calling me, Mr. Harper. My name's Daniel. Her lips parted, her breath catching at the sound of his first name on her tongue. Daniel, she said softly, almost as if testing it. He smiled, slow and gentle. That's better. The moment lingered, the air thick between them. Outside, thunder rolled, and rain battered the barn roof like 1,000 whispered confessions. Days turned into weeks. Word spread quietly through the nearby town that Daniel Harper's widow helper wasn't just a worker anymore. People talked, as they always did. Women at the general store whispered behind their hands, some with pity, others with judgment. She's not his kind, one of them said. A man like him could have anyone. Another snorted. And yet he's choosing her. Maybe he's lost his mind. Mary heard it all. She pretended she didn't, but every word sank deep. That night, she stood outside under the stars, arms wrapped around herself, wondering if she was a fool to stay. The ranch had given her safety, yes, but the heart of a woman is fragile when it remembers too much loss. She didn't hear Daniel step out behind her until he spoke. You planning to leave? She turned sharply. No, I was just thinking. He moved closer, his coat brushing hers. About what? She looked away. About what people say. His jaw tightened. Let them talk. They've got nothing better to do. It's different for you, she said quietly. You don't know what it's like to be laughed at for the way you look, or for being too much of something and not enough of everything else. Daniel took her hand again, firm, sure, unshakable. You think I don't see how the world treats you. I do. But I also see the way you face it. You keep your head up when others would bow. You work harder than anyone here, and you still find it in you to smile. That's what makes you beautiful, Mary. That's what they'll never understand. Her throat tightened. For a long moment, she just stared at him, tears glistening in her eyes. You really mean that? He nodded, no hesitation. More than anything I've ever said. The stars blurred in her vision. Then she did something she hadn't done in years, she leaned into someone. Her head rested against his chest, and for the first time since her husband's death, she allowed herself to be held. Daniel's arms came around her slowly, carefully, as if he was afraid she might break. Neither spoke. There was no need. The silence between them was finally the kind that healed instead of hurt. Winter came hard that year. The wind howled across the plains, and the snow lay thick over the fields. Many ranches nearby lost livestock, but Daniel's didn't. Mary had planned for it weeks in advance, stocking feed and firewood, checking on the animals daily. Daniel often found her in the barn late at night, her breath visible in the cold, her hands red and raw. Mary, he said one evening, you're going to work yourself into the ground. She smiled wearily. Maybe. But the horses will live. He shook his head, stepping closer. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. She looked at him, eyes soft. I don't. He smiled. Not while I'm here. She laughed quietly, the sound low and warm. You say that like I have a choice in believing you. He leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Maybe you don't. It was the first time he kissed her, not rushed, not desperate, but tender and certain. A promise made without words. From then on, the nights grew warmer, even as the snow deepened outside. They shared small moments, his hand brushing hers when he passed her a cup of coffee, her laughter echoing softly when he teased her about her singing, the way they'd sit together on the porch in silence, content just to exist in the same space. The ranch hands respected her in a way they never had another woman. She earned that, not through fear but through quiet strength. When one of them fell ill, she stayed up through the night tending to him. When the horses spooked during a storm, she was the first to calm them. And through it all, Daniel watched her with the steady eyes of a man who'd finally found peace. By spring, the land bloomed again. Wildflowers spread across the hills, and the sound of calves echoed through the valley. One afternoon, Mary was hanging fresh sheets when Daniel rode up, his horse kicking up dust behind him. He swung down and walked over, hat in hand. You've been busy. She smiled. Idle hands make trouble. He chuckled softly. Then I guess you've been trouble-free. She turned to him, her expression playful but soft. For the most part. Daniel hesitated for a heartbeat, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn box. He opened it slowly. Inside was a simple gold ring, no diamonds, no shine, just something real, something that had seen time and still held its beauty. Mary froze, her breath catching. Daniel. He took her hand, his voice rougher now. I'm not a man of fancy words. But I know what I want. I've known for a while now. You said once no one marries a fat widow. Well, I'm standing here to prove you wrong. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. You don't have to do this out of kindness. He shook his head. This isn't kindness, Mary. It's love. The kind that doesn't care what the world thinks. The kind that just fits. She covered her mouth, shaking with silent tears. I never thought anyone would say that to me again. He smiled, brushing his thumb along her cheek. Then maybe you've been listening to the wrong people. When she finally nodded, he slipped the ring onto her finger, and the world seemed to stand still. The wind, the sun, the land, all of it seemed to bow to the quiet strength between them. Their wedding was simple. The preacher came out to the ranch, and the men stood in their best shirts, hats pressed tight. There were no decorations, no grand gestures, just wildflowers Mary had gathered that morning and a pie cooling on the kitchen table. As they stood under the open sky, Daniel held her hands and whispered, "You were never too much of anything, Mary. You were exactly enough." Her tears came freely then, but this time, they carried joy instead of sorrow. And when they kissed, it wasn't the start of something new, it was the quiet continuation of something that had been building all along. The ranch carried on as it always had, fields to tend, animals to feed, storms to weather. But now, laughter filled the halls. At night, music hummed low from the parlor. And sometimes, if you passed by the barn, you'd hear Daniel's deep voice teasing softly, "No one marries a fat widow, huh?" And Mary's voice, rich and warm, would answer with a smile you could hear even through the walls, "Guess someone finally did."